So over the years, I have made a number of these why ... is a masterpiece videos, and people really seem to like them. Now, I'm sure you can understand that I have to be very selective about which titles I choose for this particular series of videos, because to say something is a masterpiece is a very bold statement, and it's not something one should throw around carelessly. That said, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the original Avatar the Last Airbender series is a masterpiece. So as always, let us break it down in 3 categories: filmmaking, story and characters, and then its effect on me personally. Now, I will be getting into spoilers, so if you haven't seen the show, please do so and come back, because trust me, it's well worth it. I think it's more than fair to say that part of what makes the show so iconic is the very specific style of filmmaking that it employs. This style of animation is quite honestly breathtaking to look at. It has this beautiful blend of the more modern cartoon look and feel that was very popular at the time of the show's release, with these brilliant exaggerated looks and movements that really take advantage of the animation form, as stuff like this would never really work in live action. But the show also has this incredibly timeless, old school feel that I have never seen in any other mainstream animated series. It is a show made by people who love films. There are very clear influences from the works of many legendary Asian directors, from Akira Kurosawa to Zhang Yimou, something I'll be exploring even more of in next week's video. But it also draws from a lot of other genres, with episodes like Zuko Alone and The Chase having a little bit of that Sergio Leone, John Ford Western flair, where most animated shows feature a lot of movement all the time, with super vibrant visuals which can sometimes feel cheap or attention-seeking. Avatar's visual language is mature well beyond its years. Part of the reason this show really stood out to me when I was younger is because of how unique and stunning it looks. There is this measured precision to the imagery that is rarely seen in any medium. The 4:3 aspect ratio is taken full advantage of with these genius compositions which do truly look like paintings. And that's another terrific thing about this show. It looks and feels like art. The way it utilizes color, lighting, composition have been so inspiring to me as a filmmaker. There are countless shots from my own personal work that I can safely say would not exist had I not watched this show. I honestly believe that every aspiring filmmaker should watch this series at least once, purely to absorb all the genius cinematography and editing techniques on display. It is without question the most beautiful piece of animation I've ever seen. I could honestly talk just about the aesthetic beauty of the show for hours, but I won't bore you with that. We also need to talk about the world building and how that is elevated by the terrific filmmaking. The creation of this particular world, from its basic lore down to the costumes and the animals in the show, are downright insane. Leaps and bounds more intricate than any other children-focused animated show I've ever seen, with the one exception maybe of Star Wars The Clone Wars, but of course that came from some pretty good source material. By the way, Clone Wars showrunner Dave Filoni, who now of course is working very hard on The Mandalorian, actually played a huge role in Avatar as he directed a large chunk of the episodes, which is further evidence of the show's quality. I will just quickly say about the world building that I love how much variety there is in every little corner of this world. It's very clear that they are drawing cultural influences from the real world, and they make that obvious enough for us to see a little bit of our world in this fictional universe, whilst also keeping things different enough so that everything feels individually tailored to this specific story. The music is also operating on a completely different level to most other animated shows. I would honestly liken some of the music to that of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, in the sense that the themes and motifs are so iconic that you know exactly what you're listening to within seconds. There is this elegant simplicity to the way the music is composed that I find to be absolutely beautiful. So much so that I would send over some pieces from the score to my composer on my film as an inspiration for certain scenes. I love it that much. Now finally, we cannot talk about this show without talking about the execution of those action sequences and the bending. That stuff is, once again, on an entirely different playing field to everyone else. It is ridiculous how creative and downright badass some of the action scenes are. The idea of being able to control the elements is cool enough, but basically anything that could be done with that idea is done, and then some. I mean, the idea that waterbenders can be powered up by the moon, which then allows them to bloodbend, is kind of sick and twisted, but also insanely cool at the same time. And of course, a blind earthbender seeing through her connection with the earth and then developing metal bending as a result of her powerful connection. It's so cool. It's so creative. Once again, you can really see the influence that it draws from old school martial arts films. The way that certain characters move around whilst bending is very reminiscent of the wire fu style of action seen in Hong Kong and Chinese cinema, for example. The legendary Orson Welles once said that a film is never really good unless the camera is an eye in the head of a poet. And that quote is so perfect for this show, because it is pure poetry. Look no further than that final Agni Kai scene between Zuko and Azula. I don't really have to say anything to prove this particular point, so I'm just going to shut up and play the scene for a little bit. Right then, on to the next section. Unlike many animated shows, which feature a very frenetic and fast-paced structure as to maintain the attention of its younger viewers, The Last Airbender really takes its time. This is an incredibly patient and methodical show that moves at a pace that is relaxed enough for us to feel immersed in the world and the lives of these characters, but also has a brilliant sense of forward momentum and energy, never allowing us to forget the end goal of Aang defeating the Fire Lord. I made a video a while ago talking about how certain films can feel like their narrative is structured like a video game, with a clear A to Z style story, whilst diverging just enough with these side mission type moments for us to feel truly immersed and invested in that world. I think that The Last Airbender's structure is very reflective of that. There is such a perfect balance of story-driven episodes where we really feel the stakes and the weight of everything. So when Aang finally faces off against Ozai, you can feel the insurmountable danger and tension. When Zuko and Azula clash for the last time, you feel every single piece of emotion and motivation without the characters having to say a word. Actually, you could probably just watch the last hour of the show on mute if you wanted to, and you'd still get exactly what they want to convey. But this is only because there are these character-driven episodes, like Zuko alone, Tales of Ba Sing Se, The Beach, or even the Avatar and the Fire Lord to a certain degree, where you can sit back and enjoy these beautifully written characters and almost appreciate these episodes as their own short film. And it's the fact that these two different kinds of storytelling are allowed to inform and complement one another that the show can be perceived as equally character and story driven. Now, speaking of those characters, some of the best ever, I mean, no real arguments can be made as to the emotional and intellectual complexity of these characters. Aang is just a wonderful protagonist, and his constant, nearly unending optimism can only be matched by his very human and down-to-earth acknowledgement of his personal mistakes and shortcomings. Katara often gets a bit of slack for being the least interesting of the main characters, but I think that's because she is in many ways the heart of the show, and the rock that keeps everyone else grounded. I would very much liken her to characters like Captain America or Jon Snow, whose moral compass is verging on incorruptible. With these characters, it's not about whether or not they change, but it's more about how their existence changes others. And Katara is a beautiful example of that. I think having a non-bender on the team is also a stroke of genius, as it really shows the dynamic between those gifted with special abilities and those who have to work a little harder to keep up with everyone else. And this is embodied perfectly in Sokka, who is so much more than just the comedic relief. And I especially loved his episodes where he had to get serious and his character was truly challenged, like the Black Sun Siege and the Boiling Rock. He really rose up as the top tier character in those storylines. Toph is, in my opinion, one of the best uses of subverting expectations, as she is one of the most unexpectedly badass characters ever. Zuko, well, we all know how great Zuko is. There are hundreds of video essays just about his character arc alone. He is basically the Jaime Lannister of the animation world, except his arc is actually fulfilled. And of course, Iroh, everyone's favorite uncle. Pure perfection. More about him next week though. The best compliment I can give to the characterization in this show is that even the villains, or the villain's friends, or the ruthless assassin who never bloody speaks, or the cabbage merchant and the tough-as-nails immigration officer who won't let his cabbages on the ship, are all more unique and enthralling to watch than most protagonists on an average show. Every single character, down to the animals, could and perhaps should get their own series. It's that good in my opinion. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this section, for anyone wondering what my personal favorites and facts are in regards to the show, here are some of them. My favorite character is probably Toph or Iroh, but I do like Zuko and Azula a lot as well. I find the Fire Nation characters to be somewhat reminiscent of the Lannisters from Game of Thrones, without all the incest and murder, but I find these kinds of complex family dynamics very interesting. I also very much appreciate Sokka's constant sarcasm. My favorite episode would be the finale, but I also really love the Avatar and the Fire Lord. My favorite duo is actually Sokka and Zuko. Like I said, I really like the dynamic they formed in the Boiling Rock arc. My favorite couple is Sokka and Suki. I like that pairing a lot, although Zuko and Mei are pretty fun as well. My favorite past Avatar, like most people, is Kyoshi, if we're not counting one. My favorite White Lotus member, aside from Iroh, is Pian Dao, because once again, I really like the idea of someone not born with powers bettering themselves to a point where they can match those with supernatural gifts. That's why I like Batman so much. Every single which element would you bend test on the internet has given me Firebender, which I'm pretty happy with. Even though it's not quite as good as The Last Airbender, I really love Legend of Korra as well, and I would not be opposed to doing a video on that at some point in the future. Despite the fact that I really like M. Night Shyamalan, The Last Airbender live-action film is my least favorite film of all time. I already have a video on that, which is nearly 2 years old now, actually. And I also have a video about how I would tackle the live-action series coming up next week, hence why I've said I'll emphasize certain things next week. Anyway, let's get into it. Now, unlike a lot of people who seem to like the show, I'm not going to use up this section to talk about how I'm Asian and the show is partly Asian inspired, so it made me feel like I had a voice or any of that nonsense. I don't need a TV series to remind me of my self-worth, and more importantly, I don't relate to characters just because they kind of look like me. I relate to characters who think like me and feel the ups and downs that I feel in my personal life, and this show has that. The Last Airbender featured people who have such a clear idea of what they want to do with their lives and are doing anything and everything they can to get there, just like Inception, just like Whiplash. And I relate to this unrelenting desire to accomplish the goals that you set out for yourself so much. But the show also brings about this very mature idea of sometimes feeling inadequate and always failing and feeling like all is lost because of constant failure and hard work not paying off. And it is so inspiring because ultimately, this is a story about bouncing back, about recovering and growing from mistakes and failures and triumphing above them, about finding light at the end of the tunnel, no matter what. And that is something that everyone can relate to. It is also conveying these themes amidst being a story of family and the pros and cons and ups and downs of the familial unit. It is a complex exploration of the importance of loyalty towards one's family, both biological and the family that you choose. It's a story of friendship and unlikely friendships that are formed through unexpected events. A story of different people from all over the world with different personalities and skill sets coming together to achieve one goal, just like Inception. That's why I think any filmmaker can relate. And of course, Avatar the Last Airbender at its core, perhaps, could be interpreted as a simple, good old-fashioned love story. It beautifully shows the difficulties that can come with unrequited love, both romantic and familial. And in that area, it's just as heartbreaking as it is heartwarming. And that is a testament to how well handled everything is. It still shocks me to this day that this was a show kind of meant for kids, because the themes are so applicable to everyone. There is a universality to it that is rare in any piece of entertainment. And yet it is also so precise and specific in its execution. And all of that is why I believe Avatar the Last Airbender is a masterpiece.